everyone's quiet. Everyone sits down. A bell goes off. Everyone starts eating. 15 minutes later, bell goes off. Everyone stands up and walks out. Everyone has to play a sport competitively. Everyone there is forbidden from using their phone most all of the day and night. One member of this dorm room might be studying while their roommate is sleeping. Every single question was about how to be a better human being physically, mentally, emotionally. And this visit was right in the early days of the recent war with Iran. So they had a lot to worry about. And they're very close to all these things. A young woman came up to me and told me that she's part of the space program now, the military space program. Amazing. Just a complete contrast to everything that we're talking about. I thought to myself, goodness, these people, young people like this still exist.
Yeah.
All firm handshakes, all eye contact. And by the way, every color you could possibly imagine. Every color you could possibly imagine. Every stature you could possibly imagine. Yeah. Every income class. I would ask people, where are you from? Part of the meet and greet, the problem was they were like, my problem is I actually want to know about where people are from, what their name is, what they're interested in. That it can just take days, right? But it was incredible. And I thought to myself, okay, there's hope. We came out of there, our team was like, yeah, there's hope. Okay, it's associated with the military. I'm sure people will scratch at that point. But thank God that these kids and this thing that we call the Navy exists because it was so inspiring. It made me level up as a 50-year-old man who thinks he's got shit mostly together, emphasis on mostly. I was like, whoa, I step it up. Now, probably their only quote unquote flaw was I did a poll. There were a lot of questions about nicotine. And I asked approximately what percentage of the room takes nicotine every day. And I would say about 20 to 30% of the hands in the room went up. Nicotine is in major use in young people.
Are they using the
oral nicotines, which by the way don't cause cancer, but yes, is very addictive, raise blood pressure. And, I'm not encouraging people to do it. But this brings me around to a separate point. I just wanted to kind of paint that picture, but to a separate point. You and I have never had a public argument, nor are we going to now, about alcohol or about cannabis. But you and I share somewhat different views on alcohol. I've been very vocal, and perhaps our most popular episode ever was the episode on alcohol. I didn't foresee that, but and the deal is 0 is better than any if we're strictly looking at health. 2 per week is probably fine. If you're going to drink more, you should probably do a bunch of other things to reduce inflammation and offset it and get good sleep and et cetera, et cetera. I'm not telling people what to do. They should just know what they're doing. You've made the argument quite aptly that alcohol can be an important social lubricant for young and older people so that they can socialize and have a life. I worry that if young people now drink more, they're going to end up drinking alone. They're going to end up masturbating to porn more alone. They're going to end up with more hangovers after all their alone behavior. I think what you've argued for is the notion of healthy fraternity, healthy dating and socializing. You've mentioned bars a couple times. Alcohol as something that can bring people together in a positive way. If you don't mind, if you could elaborate on that, and maybe I'll just toss out cannabis as another one, because cannabis has problems and I'll acknowledge benefits of its own.
So I want to go to the first thing. First is I want to just touch on Navy. I went to Annapolis when I was 17. It was because my dad was looking to get out of paying for college and decided I should go to Annapolis. And he took me and we did a tour. And we were very sophisticated. And it became so clear so fast that I was totally unqualified for Annapolis. The kids, the average SAT, these are the finest young men and women in the world. And also you have to get a recommendation from a senator. And it was just so ridiculous that we were even there. I was just not of that quality and that standard. But my dad was in the Royal Navy and decided, go to Annapolis because we don't have to pay for it. Anyways, but that was the last time I was at Annapolis. But if I could have one policy, so I'm advising a lot of Democrats running for president, which is 40 of them right now, who all claim they're not running. They're all running. If you call me and say you're really interested in my viewpoint, it means you want my money and you're running for president. And I just say, look, that's fine. Come on the podcast and I'll write you a check. If I could have one policy, one blanket, if I had a magic one policy, it'd be mandatory national service. If you look at the lowest levels of young adult depression in the West, it's 2 countries. It's Israel and Singapore. And despite all the existential threats facing Israel, what does mandatory national service do? It gives you the sense that you're serving the agency of something bigger than yourself. It gives you purpose. You're handling dangerous equipment. It's the great equalizer. You don't care that this gay kid is totally different than you. You respond to his or her character and competence. Because if you're getting fired on, you don't give a shit how rich their father is. All you want to know is this person good at what they do? and you put people's lives in your hands and they put their life in your hands, and you're serving in the agency of something bigger than yourself. I spent time with an IDF battalion in Israel and had the same kind of experience it sounds like you had at Annapolis. These are young, beautiful, fit people outside all day, meeting friends, mentors, and mates. In Singapore, the president there, who's arguably one of the greatest leaders of the last century, said this is the most religiously diverse society in the world. We're going to have ethnic violence. There'll be a strong man who will weaponize this diversity and get people to turn against each other. So we need a different religion, and it's going to be the flag. And we need to get people praying to the flag again. And if you look at the great legislation in America in the 60s and 70s, which was probably the most productive, unified time in America, it's because many of our elected leaders had all served in the same uniform, and they saw themselves as Americans before they saw themselves as Republicans or Democrats. And I'm not just saying military service, senior care, donating time at a no-kill animal shelter, being a smoke jumper. There's a lot of ways to serve. But I think young Americans would benefit so enormously from getting outside of their own circle and seeing just how wonderful America and Americans are. And having a chance. And not only that, people say, well, it's easy for you to say you've aged out. I can tell you as a father of boys, if we set it up well and invested in it, I think they would really enjoy a rotation through different parts of America and different opportunities to serve. So the one thing I would do, going back to Annapolis and the IDF and what they do in Singapore, is mandatory national service on drinking. First, my acknowledgement, as it relates to the intake of any substance, if it's Andrew Huberman or Scott Galloway, defer to Andrew Huberman's advice. I just want to say that up front. You just have the qualifications and the domain expertise here. I think, personally, the risks to a 25-year-old liver are dwarfed by the risks of social isolation. And I worry that with 40% fewer pubs now post-COVID in Britain and a lack of mating and a lack of connection, that the data I've seen, and correct me if I'm wrong, that 95% of people are able to integrate alcohol and drugs into their life without serious consequences. If you have a history of addiction, if you, for whatever reason, don't enjoy it, then by all means avoid it. If people are telling you that you're having an issue or a problem, or it's getting in the way of your work life, or you're one of those people that gets violent or mean under the influence, then for God's sakes, tone it down. But what I ask people is to look back on their younger days and say, what is the most important thing in your life? Relationships, friendships, finding someone to mate with. And I ask them, did alcohol play a role? You know, it's not easy to come in and lean in for a kiss without a glass of wine. Or let me put it this way, it is easier with a glass of wine. It's a lot of fun. I smoked a lot of pot and I drank a lot of alcohol in my 20s and in college, and it created a lot of wonderful bonding moments. And so what I'm saying, there's a balance and a trade-off. And what I would suggest is that everyone needs to make their own decision. But what scares me is the anti-alcohol movement in remote work has led to a level of isolation and fewer moments where people can bond, where people are willing to take a risk and go up to a strange person and say, hey, what's going on? So I worry that the anti-alcohol movement, what I see among young people, is that while they've demonized alcohol, it's not that they're not getting high. They're just doing a shit ton of drugs. And the thing I don't like about many of these drugs is that they're more solo activity or small group activity. I think alcohol is a group of people, I like to think, meeting new strangers. Whereas when I was in college, all the dudes who were doing cocaine, it was because they had no sexual currency and they would sequester a woman who liked cocaine and go into a bathroom.
That's creepy as fuck.
Totally creepy as fuck. And eventually everyone's like, if a dude's into cocaine, it means he has no game. I find with people when they do drugs, it's a small group of people and they sequester and it's isolating. Whereas with alcohol, and to a certain extent with marijuana, I found, it's more social and more bonding. So absolutely be cognizant of your addiction history. Absolutely be mindful of that or any other substance you're addicted to. But I believe, and I've said this on Bill Maher a bunch, and I've got some shit, but I think there's some truth here. I think young people need to drink more, go out and make a series of bad decisions that might pay off. I don't think there's anything wrong with some alcohol. I worry that the risks of loneliness far outweigh the risks of alcohol, and that alcohol has been demonized as something that if you take one drink of alcohol, you're going to get cancer or you're going to become an addict. And I don't think the data is there to support that.
I really appreciate the candid expression of where you stand. I agree that isolation is worse than alcohol, and it's compounded by alcohol. So to make that point clear, I went to UC Santa Barbara. We majored.
Speaking of alcohol,
it was part of the general education.
I remember they had sand in the dorms. I'm like, why didn't I go to school here?
Well, you know, it did select for alcoholism if people had that predisposition, and you had to be disciplined to get your work done. You know, my messaging around alcohol was, it was intended to land in three places. One, people who don't like drinking but felt that they had to got a great reason to not drink.
Yeah.
Many people wrote to me and said, thank you. I always feel like garbage after drinking. I don't want to drink. Now I understand why I feel like garbage. It's not that I was casting it toward a particular age group, but there are many people who hit their 40s or 50s and they're like, God, I'm aging fast and I look like shit and I sleep like shit and my workouts are no good and you might be drinking too much, right? Mm-hmm. And then there are the optimizers. There are people that are really just going for maximum vitality, not just longevity, but maximum vitality, which is, to me, one of the most important things. In any case, people should do as they wish, but know what they're doing, provided they're not harming anyone else. There's one thing that I want to kind of, lump in with this discussion about alcohol and your statement, which on the top contour, I totally agree with. Go out, drink, and make a few bad decisions and probably some good ones. But
bad-ish,
right. So this is the thing, phones.
Yeah.
Somebody says the wrong thing, they loosen up too much. Now it's not a problem. 3 years ago, you might be sitting in front of HR. Your classmates might isolate you, right? You were in a fraternity. I wasn't in a fraternity. I grew up in the fraternity of skateboarding, punk rock music, just the fraternity of Y chromosomes. Guys drink, they start saying stupid shit. With phones around, stupid shit is recorded. When stupid shit is recorded, it can be very harmful. And when you're drinking, you make less filtered decisions about what to say than when you're not drinking. So I'm not pushing back in that sense, but I could understand why a guy in his 20s or 30s would be afraid. A guy that would never, ever push himself on a woman, let alone something far worse, would never, ever drug somebody or anything. So I'm not talking about the Bill Cosby examples of this. I'm talking about the fear that exists in a lot of young guys and probably should exist in a lot of young women too nowadays, based on what we've observed in cancel culture. In particular, I'm just going to say a lot of white women are afraid of the Karen movement, right? That if they say anything, I think even beloved Billie Eilish, whose music I love, was called out for something she did a sort of impersonation of an Asian person at some point.
Always going to happen to famous people.
Right? Okay, always going to happen, right?
Yeah.
But people see famous people get into these situations. They go, oh my gosh. So do I think Billie Eilish is a No. And I love her music. And she was mortified and she apologized. But it's enough to make people go
100%.
And like, maybe I just stay in my room and like scroll on Instagram, So you can kind of get why the fear of drinking might also compound some of this, social media stuff that we're talking about.
Yeah. So I want to acknowledge the point. I would like to say, or I hope that at some point, I'm really glad a camera wasn't following me around 24/7 when I was 18. I can't imagine.
That one time you said that one dumb thing, right?
I just can't imagine. What I do think we are headed to, though, I'd like to think, is that in an era of social media and phones, that slowly but surely we're heading to a point of more grace where we forgive people, especially young people. So, and there's been a bunch of movements where a lot of young people did things I really disagreed with on campus after October the 7th. I was less angry at them than some of the faculty because I'm like, I cut an 18-year-old a lot of grace, right? Or I try to. The thing I would push back on is that I think there's certain looking glasses in people's soul, and one is like how they treat their pets and how they behave when they're drunk. And what I find is for every person who would say something stupid, there's more people when they get drunk who say, I just think you're wonderful. I'm so impressed by you. Or walk up to a woman and say, I just love your dress. Or God, you have such a beautiful smile. Or just walk up to her to begin with and say, and express interest. Expressing interest to someone is a wonderful thing.
Or do you want to dance?
Yeah, it says, I saw you, and by the way you move and the way you smile, I want you. I'm interested in you. That's a wonderful fucking thing. And so my sense is that for every negative thing, it may, of course, increase someone's bad judgment is revealed in an awful way. They got bigger problems than alcohol. What it also does is lower inhibitions. And I generally think the majority of people are good people. And I have found that the majority of my friends and the majority of people I'm with, when they have a little bit of alcohol, it lowers their inhibitions and they're more likely to hug you. And they're more likely to say how much they appreciate the friendship. When I was younger, I don't know if you ever did this. When I had a few drinks, I used to call my mom, and tell her how much she meant to me.
Don't let my mom hear that, please. I don't.
But I think that alcohol, to a certain extent, without getting into issues of abuse, which are much bigger, lowers your inhibitions, but you get to see, to a certain extent, that real person. And I know a lot of people will say, well, that's pathetic that you have to be the real you under the influence. But I think a lot of people reveal some wonderful things about themselves and also have the courage to reveal those things to other people. And I worry that there's so many barriers now that young people just aren't connecting. So I just want to acknowledge the point. I think you have to be really cognizant it's not a great idea unless you know you can handle alcohol to drink at work, at a professional function. It can fuck up your whole career.
Oh, I mean, one thing that I observed coming up through the academic ranks, and that just, I could not believe it, that at every gathering where you have graduate students and faculty members and postdocs, it was like the happy hour was like sort of the highlight of the meeting for many people. And it became the place where, in theory, everyone meets at the bar to talk about the data from the day, right? Like at these meetings. In reality, 90% of the problems that existed between faculty and students and postdocs and faculty that were independently married and all that stuff, alcohol facilitated that. I really believe that. I saw it over and over and over again. Caused an immense number of problems, and it was funded by grants. I mean, I'm a big proponent of trying to, and I have worked very, very hard on the phone to try and keep NIH funding, at least to not getting cut, and it looks like it hasn't, to not get the indirects cut. This is a kind of academic, inside ball stuff, but looks like, it could be far better, but, at least the cuts that were going to happen didn't happen. So the NIH funded my carear. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the NIH. I had grants, reviewed grants, et cetera. But the idea that you could spend money on alcohol, right, way back when, and then people were gathering around alcohol, it created a lot of problems. Now, students drinking with other students, less of an issue.
Well,
right?
let me propose something to get a reaction. I think they should study and thoughtfully consider lowering the drinking age back to 18. I live in the UK. And see by your face where this is going. I live in the UK.
Military, drinking age 18. I mean, I like some of the things.
Well, if you're in the military, you can drink under the age of 21, because the idea is that if you're going to die for your country, you're adult enough to order a drink. So
at least the logic is there.
That makes sense, right? But in the UK, if you're with an adult at a meal, you can order a beer at 17. And even without an adult at the age of 18 in a pub, you can order a beer. And when my son comes home, he doesn't do it as often as I would like, but when my son comes home on the weekends from boarding school, I like to take him to a local pub and we have a beer. And I found out that after one beer, he's more inclined to tell me a little bit about what's going on with him. And as a father, all you just really want conversation with your kids. You want to know what's going on with them. And so he doesn't get drunk. He's not into alcohol. He listens to you. He listens to other people. He's very wary of it. But I find that easing young men and young women into alcohol as opposed to 21, and then they kind of go, I don't know. I wonder if we should be lowering the drinking age. And the reason we raised it was Mothers Against Drunk Driving were very effective and very on point, because of all the young people who were dying in automobile accidents.
I remember that era.
I think it's gone way down because of Uber and because of airbags. So I'm proposing, would it make sense to do a study on whether you'd have more social connection and perhaps less alcoholism later in life if you let kids ease into it at the age of 18? And if they can be drafted, we're now trying to get, the administration is proposing they be drafted. So if a kid can be drafted, shouldn't he or she have the judgment to know when they can order a beer or not?
All great arguments. I didn't know we were going to end up with.
Well, I mean, you talk about cannabis.
Yeah.
I want to get your view.
Yeah.
I smoked a shit ton of pot in college. I could make a bong out of any household item. I learned every line from Planet of the Apes.
Make a pipe out of an apple. That's a very that's like a 90s trick.
Dude, that's sophomore. I can go much better than that. Anyways, but then 22, got a job at Morgan Stanley, got very focused on getting my shit together, and I basically didn't smoke for 20 or 25 years. Now I have trouble sleeping. I have trouble winding my brain down, and I take edibles. I do edibles probably twice a week. If I'm amped or think I'm going to have a tough time sleeping, I'll take a 5 milligram edible, the stuff that takes you down. I forget which one that is. And it's been an enhancement to my life. But I'm reading a lot of stuff about potential psychosis or whatever.
Not for you. You're like, the psychosis predisposition doesn't apply. You would already know. You'd be psychotic by now.
There you go. Yeah. Or I just haven't acknowledged it. But it's been accretive to my life. I really enjoy THC, and I do it packaged, so I know where it's come from. I like edibles because I like the dosing of it. But I would argue that THC is something. When my mom had stomach cancer, I was living with her, and the only thing that worked for her nausea was marijuana. And I found myself literally, Andrew, on the streets of downtown Las Vegas trying to score marijuana because I was too scared to travel with it. And this was July of 2004. And I thought, Jesus Christ, here I am on a street corner in this weird place in Vegas trying to score marijuana for my mom who has stomach cancer. So, I think there's some benefits to, well, I'll stop there. But THC usage, I enjoy. I think it's been additive to my life.
I'd like to take a quick break and acknowledge one of our sponsors, Element. Element is an electrolyte drink that has everything you need and nothing you don't. That means the electrolytes, sodium, magnesium, and potassium, all in the correct ratios, but no sugar. Proper hydration is critical for brain and body function. Even a slight degree of dehydration can diminish your cognitive and physical performance. It's also important that you get adequate electrolytes. The electrolytes, sodium, magnesium, and potassium, are vital for the functioning of all cells in your body, especially your neurons or your nerve cells. Drinking Element makes it very easy to ensure that you're getting adequate hydration and adequate electrolytes. My days tend to start really fast, meaning I have to jump right into work or right into exercise. So to make sure that I'm hydrated and I have sufficient electrolytes, when I first wake up in the morning, I drink 16 to 32 ounces of water with an Element packet dissolved in it. I also drink Element dissolved in water during any kind of physical exercise that I'm doing, especially on hot days when I'm sweating a lot and losing water and electrolytes. Element has a bunch of great tasting flavors. In fact, I love them all. I love the watermelon, the raspberry, the citrus, and I really love the lemonade flavor. So if you'd like to try Element, you can go to drinkelement.com/Huberman to claim a free Element sample pack with any purchase. Again, that's drinkelement.com/Huberman to claim a free sample pack. Yeah, I think with THC, it's highly individual. Young males in particular who have a genetic predisposition to psychosis or bipolar disorder need to be really careful, especially with high concentration THC, not just the edibles, but they do need to be careful. I think that mostly young men who are challenged with apathy, obesity, self-loathing, porn, masturbation addiction shouldn't be using THC. I think high agency, that seems to be the term nowadays, right? The guys that you mentor, a year in who are working out 3 times a week and they have a goal and they're hopefully seeking or in a relationship, they have a different self-view of themselves. And I don't see why that couldn't be a part of their week. It'll nuke their REM sleep, to be specific. If they come off, their dreams are going to be wild because they'll get more REM sleep. But creatives, there are a number of creatives who can use it appropriately to increase focus, get them out of anxiety or get them to cope with anxiety. And then there's just as many people that take it and it makes them incredibly anxious. Mm-hmm. So I think it's sort of on what backdrop. And I think the alcohol thing also is on what backdrop. If somebody's overweight, not working out, a guy in their 20s or 30s that's dealing with, let's just paint a picture here. He's like playing video games. He's not like morbidly obese or anything, but he's like kind of overweight and he kind of feels like shit. He shouldn't be drinking and smoking weed. He should be going to the gym and get himself in shape and then maybe have a couple beers a week with his buddies. So that context really matters.
Well, I would argue never do substances alone. Mm-hmm. And during the week, try not to do substances if you got to be on point the next day, that it's something to be, it's a recreation. The thing I'm curious to get your take on is one of the things I'm working with some young men on is, I think the most under-researched addiction is porn. And my fear is that, if you look at again, I go back to big tech. Big tech's trying to convince young men, why go through the pecking order and the effort of trying to develop a friend group when you have Reddit and Discord? Why go through the bullshit of putting on a tie and trying to go into the office and make a good living and navigate the corporate world when you think you can make money trading stocks or crypto on Robinhood or Coinbase? And why would you go through the effort, the expense, the potential rejection of trying to have a kindness practice, look good, work out, endure rejection, all the expenditures of going out and trying to get a date when you have lifelike porn? And I'll use myself as an example. When I was at UCLA, I graduated from UCLA with a 2.27 GPA, which isn't easy because it means I failed 9 classes, right? And I still graduated. And by the way, talk about a different age. We were both children of the University of California, UC San Diego. Talk about how blessed we are. Talk about how hurricane-like winds we had in our sales to prosperity. When I applied to UCLA, admissions rate was 74%. Now it's 9. Graduated with a 2.27. You know what happened? Berkeley let me into graduate school with a 2.27 GPA. But anyways, back to UCLA. One of my motivators for going on campus was that there was a non-zero probability that I might meet a woman, establish contact with her, see my buddies, maybe get her to a fraternity party or get her to go on a date with me, and maybe at some point be physical with her. That was an enormous motivator for me. If I had lifelike porn on my phone, on my computer screen 24/7, I don't know if I would have been as motivated to go on campus as much. And there was a little margin for error in terms of going on campus a few less times. And I worry that mojo, that desire to quite frankly go out and make your own bad porn is being reduced so much with lifelike porn that men aren't evolving into risk-taking, aggressive in a positive way men who are motivated to dress well, to work out, to approach strange women, to go through. It is hard. It is hard to find a partner. And what I say to these men is, welcome to the fucking work week. It's been hard forever. That's the whole point. Women are choosier than men, and there's a reason, right? We're trying to spread our seed to the 4 corners of the earth. They put up a much finer screen to pick the smartest, fastest, and strongest seed, and that's the reason why our kids are going to be smarter and taller than us. That's the way of the world. But when you reduce that desire, it's going to get in the way of not only you finding a mate, but developing the skills to be successful in all other parts of your life. So back to the basic premise, I wonder and worry if porn is the most under-researched addiction in the damage it's having on young men. Because what I see amongst my colleagues, and I'd be curious if I actually spoke to a really thoughtful woman about this who's an addiction professor at Stanford. I'm sure you know her. I forget her name.
Anna Lemke.
Anna Lemke.
Yeah, she runs our dual diagnosis addiction.
Fantastic.
Amazing woman, amazing human being.
Immediately when we got off the podcast, said to me, if your marijuana ever becomes a problem, just call me. And she was sincere.
That's totally Anna.
Like, do you sense it? Immediately I'm like,
she's the real deal.
I'm like, do you sense it's a problem? I'm like, hold me, Anna. Anyways, but I don't think there's enough really good research out there on porn because I don't think people want to be known as the porn professor. And so I worry that we really don't know the impact. And what I see anecdotally is that I see a lot of young men who don't have that healthy fire because they think that they can it's like in the last 20 years, the guys who didn't have their own game or didn't want to be that successful, they would go to some low-income country and basically become sexpats. This has become, I think, a much broader version of that rather than level up, you'd rather just sit home and get a reasonable facsimile of a relationship or sex with porn. I wonder if that is more damaging than people estimate right now.
Yeah, it's a really important topic, and it's one that people contact me about all the time. Your analogy of what's happening with porn to sexpats, we should probably explain what expats are. People that leave the United States. I'm not sure everyone's going to follow that one. And sexpats are this community of people that I think they go to Southeast Asia or something, right. And where they can, or South America, where they can essentially buy whatever experience they want.
Right.
In general, I have to assume, truly never done this, nor do I have any interest, but I have to assume that these are men who just basically figure, well, that's low effort once they have the money, and real dating, real sex, if I may, it takes some work and it takes some learning, and especially if you want to be told genuinely good job and know that it's true, it's going to take, right. You have to get some reps in there. So put your ego on the line, learn to communicate, learn to listen, all that stuff. The idea that porn is the much broader and more destructive analogous thing, I think is bullseye. The moment you said, I'm like, I think people need to hear that. Do you want to be that guy? I think with any behavioral change, the neuroscientist in me says, okay, we have circuits for kind of like things that are aversive to us. Like you have to engage the aversion and you have to engage the appetitive aspect, right? Like so that there's a win and then there's something to avoid. I really think in order to get any real behavioral change, you need to push away from something and towards something else. Okay, so I think that porn, it's our most fundamental wiring. The two circuits in the brain that really crank out dopamine. Mm-hmm. Okay, circuits for reproduction, sex, and anger. There's this incredible study by a very controversial guy named Robert Heath in the 1960s. He was a neurosurgeon who would stimulate different areas of the brain. And unfortunately, he was into conversion therapy. So, he appropriately got run out of science for trying to make gay people straight by stimulating certain areas of the brain. Yeah, he's kind of a piece of shit person. But again, let's look at what he did separate from that. Immediately, people are like, I don't care about his data. But he gave people with electrodes in their brain, in certain studies, the option to stimulate anywhere they wanted. They could stimulate and get sexual arousal. They could get laughter. They could feel drunk. All the things we're talking about, really. They could feel soothing of the sort that their mother was holding them. The area that they chose to stimulate the most is in the central midline nucleus of the thalamus, an area that my lab has spent a lot of time on in other situations. And they would just lever press and lever press and lever press for the feeling of mild frustration, anger. Because the arousal associated with it is its own reinforcement. As a student of mine who's now hopefully soon to be a faculty member, I won't name the university, but she has an offer from a phenomenal university. Her name is Lindsay Soleil. And she's worked on this in a very, very mechanistic way. When we're angry, when we're frustrated, the link to the dopamine circuitry is just pounded out. We just all day long. And what's amazing is it doesn't attenuate. There's no threshold for anger. The more angry you get, the more frustrated you get, the more arousal you feel from that, you never satiate. There's no postcoital bliss. There's no, my belly is so full, I feel like I'm going to explode. And so this gets to the social media thing too. That's the circuit that I worry about. And I think that's the circuit that, yes, I think big tech has tapped into, whether they want to or not. And I think that that's the one we really have to be careful of. And I've experienced it myself. I think I actually, in this moment, I'm experiencing a little bit of it, like that kind of arousal of like, yes, the forward center of mass that we feel. But when it's fuck them, like fuck the Republicans and, or fuck the left or the extreme woke. People are just high all day long on their own anger and frustration. And I think we just see it everywhere. And I raise my hand. I'm sure I'm guilty of this at times too.
Yeah, that's illuminating because I correlate my anger to a pathway to feeling depressed. I struggle with anger and depression. And it usually starts as something triggers me. I get really angry. And then I feel like my blood turns to some sort of corrosive acid and it just wears me down.
That's adrenaline.
And I'm just depleted. I'm just depleted for 2 or 3 days. So I have a practice around trying to calm my anger, but just hearing you say that occasionally on one of my podcasts, when I see something that's inherently wrong and I point it out or unjust, I do feel like a rush, like I'm being a leader or a baller or pointing something out.
You are. I will say, testosterone, a conversation we've had a little bit before offline, at the level of the brain, it makes effort feel good. Anyway, I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent, but I'd like your thoughts about how testosterone can be leveraged for good versus bad, and maybe even, I don't know that we put everyone on testosterone. I'm not suggesting that it can nuke your fertility if you don't do other things to offset it. So kids, be careful. But what are your thoughts on testosterone and just sort of proactive male behavior, testosterone in adults, older generations taking testosterone?
Well, I'm one of them. I'm on T therapy, and I do it because I quite frankly want to feel younger. It makes me stronger in the gym, better erections, even weird things like my skin. The way I would describe T therapy is it just kind of took me back 3 or 5 years in the gym. So I'm an advocate for it. You should do it under the guidance of a doctor, which I'm doing, but I'm a fan of it. And I think you've done really interesting work about hormone replacement theory. I've listened to a lot of your work on it. The argument around testosterone and masculinity, I think, is a really important one in the political spectrum because to the far right's credit, they recognize the problem with young men before anybody else. The problem is they conflate masculinity with coarseness and cruelty, and their solution was to take non-whites and women back to the 50s.
Some of them. I'm not trying to protect them, but I would say, I don't know his political leanings, but my friend Jocko Willink has daughters. He's not that guy you just described.
No, I'm talking about the far right. I'm talking about whether it's Donald Trump or quote unquote, the traditional manosphere. It's about the subordination of women, and it's about demonstrating a certain harshness and coarseness, and I would argue cruelty, and conflating that with masculinity. Whereas the far left, and this isn't helpful either, their advice to young men is to act more like a woman, and that they conflate masculinity with toxicity. And there has to be something in the middle. There has to be an aspirational form of masculinity. And I would argue that we need to celebrate that initiation, aggressiveness. All right, Jimmy Carr, who's one of my idols now, says, all right, you can demonstrate cruelty or you can demonstrate valor. You can be a lover or you can be an addict. And Richard Reeves has this great saying. He's like, you want a man to be invaluable in a shipwreck, but acceptable at a dance. So there is a certain needle to be threaded here. But the Carnegie Award, which is given out to people who put their own physical safety in danger to save someone else's physical safety. It's literally the running into a burning house award. You see a car on fire, you put your own safety in harm's way to try and protect someone else's physical well-being. They gave out 83 awards last year. 75 of them were men. Men are more prone to take those types of not only bad risks, but good risks. And we need to celebrate that. Now, you need both. You need both on the combat field, because men are more likely to rush out and try and save their comrade, but women are more likely to say, let's not be stupid. Let's think this through. You need both of those. This is the great thing, is that both energy, when they come together, make a better world. But we seem to be very suspicious of that masculine energy right now. And I think it needs to be celebrated. There needs to be someone who sees movement in the tribe and immediately grabs the spear and goes and tries and kill it for the benefit of the community, who wants to put people on Mars and makes these crazy, ridiculous investments that make no sense and is super aggressive around these things. I think that's a wonderful energy. And when I went to the Democratic National Convention, I saw a parade of special interest groups talking about the very real issues they all face, but I didn't see one mention of the group that has fallen further faster than any group in recent history, and that is young men.
Well, I think that's because based on the feedback I've received, for instance, when we had Terry Real on the podcast, who talks about, some balance of masculine and feminine phenotypes in therapy and partner-partner communication and these kinds of things, the pushback that I always get I got there, not because of Terry specifically, was as long as we can't talk about toxic femininity, these were clearly men writing to me, then this whole discussion feels imbalanced. That's how they feel. They feel like there's this idea that they're good men and they're bad men and they're really bad men. Totally agree. I've got the optics of a macaque monkey blindfolded on LSD when it comes to certain members of our species, but when it comes to men, I grew up in a big group of boys, et cetera, big group of men. I get it. That statement is true. They're great ones. They're ones, and then they're like really bad dudes. So when you talk about manosphere, I would say if I had my way, manosphere would apply to just the really bad ones, because that name has become synonymous with really bad men. Okay, we can come back to that perhaps. But there is this issue that no one is allowed to say there's wonderful femininity, there's women with issues, right? And then there's bad women. You're not allowed to say it. The only women that I can have that conversation with are lesbians. They were the ones who explained to me there are truly bad women. And I said, well, how come no one talks about that except lesbians? And they said, because we are living in a time now where men talking about women or having things they wish for women to do differently itself is seen as toxic. That women feel, this is what I was told, so I'm regurgitating, that they've suffered so much at the hands of men that we need like a good 20 or 30 years before we're ready to get to that conversation. Yeah. Which, of course, for young men growing up, just makes them feel like, okay, it's all on us. And that's good. Like agency, advocacy for one's own life is important. Stay out of the really bad men category and ideally the not so good men category too. But the polarization, I think, is set by the fact that, sure, we can talk about toxic masculinity. We can talk about the male crisis. But why aren't we talking about the suicide rate? Well, because women's issues, I think in a good way, we're still thinking that we need to protect and provide for the women and the children in our society. We're holding that as in the highest regard. Like they get the life rafts on the Titanic when the Titanic goes down. So, it's complicated. And there's a lot of off limits terms. And I'm glad that they're coming up today just organically, because those off limits terms, I think,